Here it is. The most beautiful spacecraft or vehicle ever designed in history. A lot of people are like, oh, but it wasn't even reusable, it was refurbishable.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it was... People say it was a failure because it wasn't reusable. Yeah, well, it was the first refurbishable spacecraft. And it still saved a ton of money compared to other rockets. Each Saturn V to launch Skylab cost $2 billion per rocket. Sure, this costs the same, but the cargo bay on this is bigger. Well, kind of, I guess. $2 billion per shuttle. Still cheaper than the Saturn V, I think. Especially with inflation. And it wasn't entirely expendable. The boosters were recoverable, refurbishable. The external tank, they couldn't do anything about that, but that was really kind of the least valuable part of the entire shuttle, was the external tank. Fun fact, the most expensive part of this entire space shuttle, of all the space shuttles, the most expensive equipment was the main engine. There's one of the doors that slides open when it... oh yeah, fun fact about the doors, they don't close. So if you open the wheels too early, you have to deal with it because the doors don't close. So they had to make sure they had to make sure they were okay to land before they opened the wheels, because if they opened them, couldn't close them. Because basically the doors were just held by a latch and it would open and they would drop down. So no hydraulics to open it back or close it. Mainly because they didn't need it too, because when this thing, in case you didn't know, when it burned all of its onboard fuel in space. So once it came back to the Earth, it was the entire time from space back to the ground, it was just a giant glider, which was basically the worst glider in history because it's like a giant flying brick. It's not aerodynamic at all, but they had to, because if they had an aerodynamic and sharp nose, it would have torn the wings off because of the shock wave. So they had to opt with this. So the shock wave would catch right there on the curved part of the wing. And that was just to ease it on the wing attaching right there. So that's just... So, basically, pretty much, if you were to miss the runway, you were kind of screwed, because you can't really do a go around in this thing, because they'd come in at over 200 miles per hour to land, and even 200 miles per hour, it was still basically having to land like the Concorde, because these tiny wings compared to the entire mass of the shuttle is ridiculous. Here's the main engine. So here it is, the SSME. There's the turbo pump. I want to see if I could find the gas combustion chamber for the turbo pump. So that right there is a low pressure turbo pump. That's a high pressure turbo pump. Here's the main engine, the bell nozzle. And then if you look, you see how it's all streaked. That's because every one of those was to supply the fuel, because the fuel was at negative 200 degrees. And you have to keep it cool somehow. So basically, they run the fuel inside the engine to keep it cool because it was at negative 200. And while also running it along the inside, it also fueled it. So it was a pretty genius design. Really genius. I've never... think it's, not sure, but I think it might be one of the only engines, if not the only engine, to cool itself with its own fuel, which is awesome. And then if you look in there, you can see the fuel injector, where it would mix and inject the hydrogen and oxygen. Sorry, my camera is, I don't know what's wrong with it. It's terrible all of a sudden. It used to be good, and now it's decided it doesn't want any of it. I could stand here all day. Oh, yeah, there's the orbital maneuvering system on the back. There's the giant cold gas thruster. Right up there. There's the 3 main engines. Pretty sure none of these are actually the full engine. I think it's just the nozzle, and they don't have like the combustion chamber or anything like that. So you can see all the maneuvering systems. See if I could get a better view of that engine. Not really, but you can see it. So those engines would get it into a highly elliptical orbit, and then they would burn out of fuel. But to basically keep it from being elliptical to circular, they would use that engine, the orbital maneuvering engine. I wonder why it's called that. But they would also use it to deorbit. You know, they only need to slow down 200 miles per hour around to deorbit on one side, and then they would just slam into the atmosphere. Not slam, they would hit it very lightly. I forget how long the entire re-entry process took. I think it took like 38 minutes. Took forever. There's those tiles, which, oh yeah, there's a carbon-carbon reinforcement, and that is what almost stopped STS-117, because on 117 a piece of foam actually hit it right around there, and they almost canceled the mission, but then they decided not to, and that apparently it actually was worse than they thought, but it still made it. It shows you how much of a beast these things really are. There's the nose. There's the front orbital maneuvering system, RCS, as it's called. There's the windows all the way up there. I believe it's quartz glass because it's strong, heat resistant, all that. Endeavour. And there are the huge cargo bays, which also act as a radiator. So on the inside, they're like giant mirrors to radiate heat. But because of that, when it was actually in sunlight, the metal would actually expand. So that's fun. But that's also another genius design. You know, the doors are giant. Why not also use them as a radiator? And they did that. And then it caused some problems because it would expand. But whatever. There's the wings, United States. I want to see how high I could get. Not high enough. Oh well. There's the tail. I'll show you. You can see the tail is split. And let's go look at the tail. Actually, while we're here, I'd love to show you the front mount, where it mounted to the external tank. If you look in the missions, this is actually just like 2 little struts that hold it down. Connect to that point right there. And then if we go to the back, right over here, you can see where it attached at the lower section of the external tank. It's being held there. As you can see, it's got a bunch of little holes that all do things. I believe every one of those holes was used to mount it. And those doors are also really cool because as soon as it detaches, those just slam shut. which is funny. I don't know if those doors can actually open. I don't think they can. But they can close, and then the landing gear can open, but it can't close. That's genius. I mean, they didn't really need to open or close either of them. But whatever. They won't really need to ever, anyway. So don't think I actually looked at the elevons, so let's look at that. So these control the rudder and also act as the flaps. Weirdly enough, they don't control pitch here. They control pitch with that, which I don't know how a lot of air could get there. A lot of air doesn't. They just use the bottom part to make it work. But there is the elevator. Just chilling. There's the elevons. And there, up there, is the rudder. A beautiful rudder. And if you look, you can see the split down the middle, where if you'll notice when it's landing, it'll open up the tail. The tail is actually also a giant air brake, which is why it's split. It opens out on both sides, acting as an air brake. Because this thing is so heavy, you're gonna need an air brake, which they almost never used because of it being, you know, about as aerodynamic as a shoe. That's not an exaggeration. It's about as aerodynamic as a shoe. So, you know, just keep that in mind. There's the door and there's no higher places, unfortunately. That would be great if I could see it up high, but whatever. There is, can't see the ones on top, but those are more holes. Those are the vents, I believe. It's lit up inside. There's the window, and there's the inside of it. I believe that's the inside right now. It's a flight deck. Live views of endeavour. Space Hab. Speaking of which, Space Hab, another one is right over here. So this was almost always on the space shuttle in the later missions. So this would just sit there. Look at that. I love it. So let's look at the more notable parts. So if you look up there, you'll see the space shuttle is covered with thermal blankets. Why not just cover it with all of that? One, because that's really expensive. Two, so what you have to keep in mind with these tiles is every single one is numbered. And so they had to line up the numbers of every single tile perfectly. So that's just one of the longest parts of building the shuttle, was just putting all the tiles on here, because you have to make sure every single one is in the right place, and there's well over 20,000. There's a little flake of the tile that is just gone, presumably from re-entry, but it's okay. So another thing is the tiles are really heavy, because the blankets are just blankets. And the blankets also are white, so they don't capture a lot of the heat. The black tiles are painted black too, or well, I believe they have a carbon coating. That's why the inside is white, but the outside is black. That way it would attract all the heat instead of the actual shuttle sides, because the sides were kind of not nearly as strong as the wing structure. There is the carbon paneling. The nose is also carbon. I love all of this. But that's the most crazy part about the space shuttle. I feel bad for every single person who had to put those tiles on. That is ridiculous. But even though it wasn't reusable, which was the goal, it was refurbishable, which was a huge improvement from expendable. But of course, we're going back to expendable with SLS because screw it. But we got tired of the space shuttle. I honestly think we should redo the space shuttle and relaunch it because it was great. It really was. Especially the orbiters, they were fantastic, but they took forever to put together. Sure, if we were to redo a space shuttle nowadays, we could make it so much better because it was done in early 70s. But I'm gonna go now because my arm is sore. But there it is. There's the beautiful, beautiful space shuttle that everyone seemed to think was bad because it wasn't reusable. Yeah, it was refurbishable. Keep in mind what we were doing before this was created. You know, the Saturn V, which was a giant $2 billion rocket that was literally just being thrown away. Even the only thing that stayed alive was still in existence, basically, was the crew module. So this is just incredible. 8 crew is the maximum capacity, and I love this thing. You can't tell I love the space shuttle. It is my favorite rocket just because of how incredible it is to watch. Literally wish I could have seen it fly. So I'm gonna go. Yeah, bye.